Hello to those joining. We'll just spend a minute or two waiting for people to go through whatever they're doing, get to their laptops, finish their meetings, and then we will get started. Brilliant. Right, great to see everyone this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are logging in from. My name is Jack Green. I will introduce myself in a bit more detail shortly, but this session today is obviously linked to Mental Health Awareness Week and movement. As a former athlete, this is incredibly important to me, but also former because I use movement in my day-to-day now to also help me regulate my stress and my mental health and make sure I've got the capacity to perform in the ability that I want to. But today will be an introduction to myself and my story before we then go into more the practical piece. I think it's so important with keynote speakers, with webinars, podcasts, whatever it is, to be able to have that practical takeaway knowledge that we can then use to either help ourselves or to help others as well. So that will be a really important part. This session will be 25 minutes, and if there are questions, we will be able to have those 5 minutes to answer those. If not, then we'll be able to finish a little earlier and get on with our days and hopefully take the practical knowledge that we've gained from this session and start applying it. So let's start with introduction to myself. As I said, my name is Jack Green. I am a double Olympian. I represented Team GB at 2 Olympic Games at London 2012 and Rio 2016. I competed in the 400-meter hurdles and the 4x400-meter relays, the horrible events that no one particularly wants to do, but that's the one that I was blessed with some kind of physical ability for and ended up progressing in and becoming reasonably successful. Now, I went to 2 Olympics where I finished 4th in London 2012, but I'm also a world medalist and a multiple European champion, as well as finishing 4th at the Commonwealth Games. All of that sounds great, but that's not all that I've done or who I am. My identity isn't just as an athlete. I also struggled with my mental health, which I will take us through shortly, and led to me being diagnosed with mental health disorders at the age of 21. I coach. So I have athletes that competed at the last Olympics in Tokyo and have won world titles and broken national records for the likes of Great Britain, but also Italy as well. And then I've worked in workplace wellbeing. I've been the head of wellbeing at BBC, the global wellbeing lead there. I have then worked with Walking on Earth and how we support not only our clients, but all the people that we work with beyond that to regulate their stress and understand that stress is something that can be a positive. It's not just a complete negative. We need that stress to be able to perform, but being able to manage it and not let it overwhelm us is so important to our overall well-being, but our productivity and our performance as well. So, my story. When I was young, I had no real interest in sport. And when I say young, I mean really young, because when I was 7 years old is when I found out that sport was something I was particularly interested in, but also something that I was good at. I ran down the grass track at my primary school. I beat everyone by a country miles. We were trying out for our sports team. And I thought, quite like winning things and I quite like being good at something. Maybe this is the thing I'm going to do. And from that day onwards, my whole life was about running around, about being an athlete. Now, it might sound strange, but from the age of 7, I was making choices about what will help me get to an Olympic Games, what will help me be a champion, the best athlete that I can be, even from the age of 7. And my career was quite smooth. I wasn't the best athlete in the world when I was young. I would win kind of county, state, those regional medals, but nothing that said I would be an Olympic athlete or one of the best athletes in the world. But it wasn't until I was 14, 15 years old that I started running the 400 meters and then the 400-meter hurdles. And in my first race in the 400-meter hurdles at 15 years old, I broke the British record for my age and thought, right, this is the one that's going to get me to where I want to be. At 16, I was unbeaten throughout Europe for my age, and at 17, I represented Great Britain for the first time. At 18, everything started to go professional for me. I came 3rd at the World Junior Championships, and I signed a contract with Nike to be a professional athlete and started working in one of the best groups in the world at that point in my event with a coach who'd coached Olympic champions and world champions. And this is where everything really changed because I was starting to live my dream at the age of 18. Only 11 years later, from writing those stories and running down that grass track for the first time, I was starting to become everything I'd ever dreamt of. In that first year as a professional athlete, I became the youngest ever winner of a European title. I'm the only teenager to win a European title. I then went to a World Championships for the senior athletics team, racing against the people I used to watch and admire and want to be like. And then at that point, we're 1 year out from Olympics. And I was 106th in the world when I was 17. By the age of 18, turning 19, I was ranked 16th in the world, 1 year out from a home Olympic Games in London. And quite honestly, it felt quite easy. I'd worked incredibly hard, but things had just gone my way, and I thought that that would continue to happen. And in my head, I thought, why can't I go from 16th to first? I've gone from 106th to 16th. Why can't I go from 16th to first? And this is where things changed in terms of my intensity. Now, I've always been intense. I've always been quite obsessive and always had a lot of determination, dedication. But I required from myself that I had to have Olympic champion qualities every day, every second of every day. And that intensity wasn't sustainable. I started to become inconsistent, both in my mood off the track, but also in my performances on the track, because I was trying to live at a level that just wasn't possible. Because of these ups and downs, it wasn't looking like it was going to be a great year. But then in the run up to the Olympics, in the last race before we went to those Olympic Games, I ran a personal best that put me 6th in the world, and I beat the reigning Olympic champion. And as a young man with a lack of experience and emotional intelligence, I just thought, brilliant, everything's going my way, destiny's going to take over. I'll be Olympic champion in just 2 weeks' time. Now, those Olympics, as I said, I'd been writing about since I was 7 years old. And at 20 years old, I'm here in front of a home crowd. It's everything I've ever wanted. And yet I have very few memories from the London Olympics. And that's because I was so full of fear that I couldn't see anything outside of that. I had no clarity. I had no perspective. I couldn't even enjoy the moment. And the fear came because I put so much pressure and expectation on myself. And it felt like this was the time to show whether I was worthy, whether I was up to it, whether every decision I'd ever made from the age of 7 was worthwhile. And that pressure was huge. The last place I wanted to be at that moment was the Olympic Games, yet that was my dream. I went into the semi-final, I got to the third hurdle, I hit that hurdle and I fell, all because I had so much fear inside of me that I couldn't execute my race. And in front of 80,000 people and millions watching at home, I fell in front of them all. And that was my first Olympic experience at 20 years old. Now, I was very fortunate to go on and finish 4th in the relay, and I missed a medal by 0.13, but that felt like another kick in the teeth. And what I struggled with post those Olympics was the fact that I didn't give myself the opportunity to see how good I could be because I got in my own way. And that was the hardest thing. Because I worried about all the noise, because I worried about all the things outside of just myself and my race, all the things that didn't matter, I stopped myself from doing what I do best, which is just run around. The time I ran 2 weeks before those Olympics would have made me the youngest Olympic finalist in history. I was fast enough to make those finals. The athletes I'd beaten in that final race, 2 of them went on to become Olympic gold and silver medalists. And it felt like they were living my dream. Now, my story doesn't particularly help you at this point because essentially I was just physically gifted and I worked very hard and I got some success. But you don't learn anything. But hopefully what happens in the rest of my story and the things I can share after this will be the things that can really help you be able to perform to the best of your ability. 6 months after those Olympic Games, 6 months to 12 months, I ended up being diagnosed with depression, bipolar tendencies, generalized anxiety disorder, and I was considered a threat to my own life and spent 6 weeks in the Priory in Birmingham in the UK getting special support. And yet at that point, I was 4th placer at the Olympics, top 10 in the world, and voted the most talented sports person of a generation from Britain. And yet I was struggling. Now, what people can get wrong with my story is they think that because I didn't perform at an Olympics how I wanted to, is why I struggle with mental health. But I can tell you that I definitely struggled when I was young. now that I have the perspective and the understanding of what mental health is. I definitely struggled when I was young with anxiety and perfectionism, and still do have elements of that now. But also, whether I run fast or run slow, and I definitely run slower now that I'm retired, I still have to manage my mental health. I still have ups and downs. I'm still a human being first. That was a big learning for me, was understanding I wasn't just this superhero athlete. I wasn't invincible. I was a human being and I was going to feel emotions and I was going to struggle. And that actually wasn't what life is about. It's about how I manage that struggle. Whereas I thought I couldn't even experience those things because I was different. And I struggled for a long time because I believed mental health didn't exist. I believe that mental health was an excuse for people that weren't successful like me. I thought it was made up. And because of that, I just refused to even acknowledge that that might be an issue that I had. And then at the age of 21, after being diagnosed with these disorders and understanding mental health a lot better, I decided to go public with those issues. And then I ended up taking 2 years out from track and field to manage myself and learn about myself and my mental health. After those 2 years out of the sport, I then returned to sport, mainly because I didn't know I could do anything else, which was a real shame that my identity was so attached to sport. But I returned to the sport and I ended up becoming a European champion again. I became a world medalist and finished fourth at the Commonwealths and went to my second Olympics. But it wasn't as simple as that. It wasn't as simple as I just returned to the sport, mental health doesn't bother me, or you're cured or you're fixed, because I really struggled with my mental health still during that time. It showed how much I hadn't learned during my struggles, because I went back into my old mindset of aren't I great, aren't I wonderful, instead of understanding life a little bit more. And at the age of 28, after coaching myself for 4 years and really struggling and emotionally burning out, at the age of 28, I'd got to the point where my mental health was so poor, despite my positive results on a track, my life was really struggling because I wasn't able to recover. I wasn't able to actually give myself the space to keep performing well, that I'd burnt out again, that I'd broken again, because I was just constantly pushing instead of pushing and then recovering. And at 28, because my mental health got so poor, I started to see a therapist at that point to get some support. And this therapist asked me one question as to why I would continue in sport. And the only reasons I could come up with were external ones, because of expectation, because of pressure, that other people would expect this from me, that why wouldn't you want to be an athlete? I couldn't come up with one reason as to why I wanted to be. So I made the decision at 28 years old to retire from professional sport and go on a different journey. And it's the biggest decision I've ever made and probably the bravest, because it went against what other people expect. It required a lot of courage because it was different. And that was just a really interesting part of this journey. I retired at an age where you peak. You peak between the ages of 28 and 32. But yet I made a decision to not peak in sport, but to progress in my life and manage my mental health a little more and find out who I was beyond just being an athlete. And as you know from my introduction, I then became a head of well-being in a corporate environment before then working with the likes of Walking on Earth in how we support people to thrive both personally to allow us to thrive professionally. That we're a human being 24 hours a day and we're just an employee or whatever hobby you have for a part of that. So why wouldn't we focus on the bigger picture? But also bridging that gap between well-being and performance. Well-being has always been seen separate to performance, whereas I'm very passionate about the fact that well-being is looking after yourself so that you have the capacity and the ability to perform when it matters. Because if we keep putting more and more into our tank, if we're overflowing with the amount of stuff that we have, we feel overwhelmed, of course we're not going to be able to show up and be our best selves when it matters. Whereas being able to move, be able to exercise, be able to eat well, to socialize, make sure our financial well-being's in order, that then gives us that capacity back to go and spend on the things that matter, which is your performance, being able to show up, whether that's at home or at work or both. And I think that's a really important understanding we need to have around well-being. But that's a real as quick as I can do, part of my story. And there's so much more to it and overcoming a lot of adversity and struggles. And if anyone wants to speak around that in the future, I'd love to share that. But things I want to talk about are these practical tips. What are the lessons that I've taken from a sporting environment, from an elite performance environment, that you can use in your day-to-day to become the best whatever you want to be? Now, the first one I like to talk about is how you measure yourself, because I measured myself solely on results. If I ran fast, I was a success and I'm a good person. If I ran slow, I'm a bad person and a failure. And that's a really hard life to live. It's great when it's great, but it's really tough when it's not. Because results don't tell the full story. They don't give you the whole picture. They don't understand you're a human being and that you have ups and downs and that life can be tough. If you start to measure yourself on effort instead, that's where we lead to consistency and sustainable success, the impressive people that keep winning, not just win once and then disappear. Because effort understands you're a human being. Effort understands that you might not have slept well last night. You might have stress at home. There might be family issues. You might have financial issues, whatever it is. You've only got 60% in the tank. So all you can ask of yourself is, did I give 100% of that 60 on that day? Did I give 100% effort? You can't ask for anything more. And I learned that working with the best athletes that have ever lived, world record holders, Olympic champions, the best of the best. They were not superstars every day, but they were always there. They'd show up. They'd be there with intent. They'd give everything they had, and sometimes that wasn't much, but it allowed them to keep fighting every single day instead of going too far one day and disappearing the next. So that's the first one, measuring yourself on effort over results. The next one I like to talk about is control the controllables. We've all heard it. It's really difficult to do, but it's an important kind of insight to be aware of. And I talk about it from my experience in sport as stay in your lane. It's understanding that the only things you can control are in your lane, which is you. It's being able to understand it. We have the choice in how we respond to something. We don't just have to react to something. I finished 4th at the Commonwealth Games and I missed a medal by 0.2 of a second. Well, 0.02 of a second, 200ths, same thickness as a t-shirt. And yet I celebrated that race because it was the first time in my life that I focused solely on myself and understood that 3 people were going to go and run fast. And the only way I can affect their result is by running fast myself and focusing on myself rather than focusing on everything else around me. Control the controllables. Choose how you want to respond. Focus on the things you can do something about, not the things that you can't. The next one is around meaning, purpose, and why. A lot of us will probably have read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, or we've looked at Simon Sinek's work around why and purpose. So important. It's very easy to continue to be successful when you are successful, when it's positive, when it's good. But when it's tough, what keeps us going? And that is finding meaning in the struggle. That is having a why, having a purpose. So ask yourself, why do I do what I do? Is there a bigger reason? Is there something that keeps me moving forward when things are difficult? Start to discover what that is. Because without that, life becomes really hard. It becomes hard to keep moving forward. I used to train twice a day, every day. And there were days where I didn't want to be there. Or you're on the track and you're throwing up because you push yourself to that level. You've lost your eyesight, which would happen every now and then. You'd lose your eyesight for an hour because you just pushed yourself to a place that you probably shouldn't push yourself to. So what then gets you up again to do it the next day or to keep going? And for me, it was understanding that track and field, in my case, was a vessel, that the faster I ran and the more medals that I won would give me the more opportunities to have platforms like this, to be able to share some of these learnings and help other people, help you either hopefully not go through some of the things that I went through, but at least have the tools to manage those times better than I did. And that was hugely powerful because there was a reason for me to struggle. When you're struggling, I'm struggling for a reason. Now, you might not be able to define this straight away, or it might change as you change, but getting some idea as to why you do what you do is so important for keeping moving forward. The next one I like to talk about is super strengths. And this is a case of understanding that you are where you are because you are good at something. You are not in the room or the career or the opportunities that you have because you are bad at something. That's not to say to completely ignore the things that might need to be improved upon or considered weaknesses. As long as they're not detrimental to you, though, why focus on them? If you focus on all the things you're not good at, you become the same as everyone else. Whereas what makes you different, what stands you out, is the fact you're great at something. So why not be even better at it? Focus on the things that make you great or you're already great at, and push it further and further and further, because that's the thing that will make you different, not doing what everyone else does. And I think that's something that's not particularly focused on, because we like to focus very much on the negative instead of the positive. The other things I'd like to talk about include challenging this saying. And this saying is, there is no growth in the comfort zone. And I like to challenge this because I think there needs to be more definition around it. It needs to be understood a little bit better. And that is the fact that comfort zones are really important. Safety and security is essential, and it's essential to growth. It is correct that you do not grow in the comfort zone, but you recover there, you learn there, and you rest there. You push yourself out of your comfort zone and you put yourself into really intense environments, difficult environments, uncomfortable environments to then get that experience. But then you come back to your comfort zone to recover, to do it again. And I think when we hear that saying of there's no growth in the comfort zone, we think we always have to be out there in no man's land, in a really difficult place that if it's not uncomfortable, then it's not good for us. But it's not sustainable to stay in a difficult place. You can't do that all the time without something breaking or burning. So you need a comfort zone. You need some safety so that you can come back, get that energy back to then go again and fight again, to learn again. I just like to talk about that because I think it's so important to understand. The other two things I'll talk about, this one links to that, and I'll just touch on it very quickly. We talk about that comfort zone. A lot of the times that comfort zone is your support. When I talk about safety, that's your people. There are thousands of people who helped me get to that start line at an Olympic Games. I might get the credit and it might look like it's just me, but I have so many people that I have to thank, and I owe my career and my life to, because they either sacrificed or made the choice to support me, or they gave me opportunities. My mum and my grandparents, for example, used to take me all over the place just so that I had the opportunity to become great. And then there are so many people I don't even know about who helped me. So think about who's on your team. It takes so many people. And that can be both personally, who's on your team, but also at work. Who's on your team? Who supports you? Who do you work with to help you grow and develop? Who covers those things that might not be your super strengths, so that you can go and perform and do the things you're great at? And then the last one I'd like to talk about, and anyone who's listened to me before will have heard this because I think it's such an important lesson, but I used to consult with the Navy SEALs when I lived out in America for a short time. And they taught me so much. And one of the things they taught me that I'll share with you is how to view conflict and confrontation. Typically, in this world, we view everything as a threat. And when we view everything as a threat, as danger, we go into that response, that emotional response, high stress response of fight, flight, freeze, or the new one, which is fawn. Whatever happens in that moment is a little bit of a lottery, because it's a reaction. It's not repeatable. And we're either going to go headfirst into something with no plan, or we're going to run away from something with no plan. Success is not repeatable in that world. We don't want to be there. What we want to do is view every difficult situation, or where we feel the anxiety or start to sweat. When we see that, that's when we want to reframe and view it as a challenge. Because reality is, we're never really being threatened. We're just being challenged to see what we're capable of doing, what we have in the tank, what we're up to. It becomes a bit of a game. I can feel my shoulders drop as I say challenge rather than threat. And if you can start to bring that clarity and choose to react rather than respond, to respond rather than react, that's where we're going to get success and repeatable success, because what happens in that choice is something you can continue to do and learn from and repeat. And linked to that, and this is the last bit, and then I'll answer a few questions if there are any. The last bit is very similar, but just something of act and environment. When I was 7 years old, I ran down a grass track. for the first time, and my sole aim was to run as fast as I could. When I went to the Olympics, actually all I was being asked to do was run as fast as I could. So the act didn't change, yet it felt very different. And the reason it felt different is because my environment changed. There were 80,000 people in a stadium, there's cameras, there's pressure, there's everything attached to it. Yet actually I'm not being asked to do anything that I haven't done before. And if you can start to go into those difficult environments and start to ask yourself, has the act changed or the environment? You start to realize that 99% of the time, it's just your environment that's changed. You're not being actually asked to do anything that either you haven't done before or you're not capable of doing. And when you can bring that in, it brings that stop into that thought process, into that emotional reaction, allows you to bring clarity and bring logic. And that's where we bring repeatable success, which I really wish for everyone on this call that we'll all be able to get to that place where we can respond and then be able to get repeatable success and a plan. Clarity is so important, and that's what it brings. So I'll answer a few questions before we then move on into finishing the session and getting on with our days and hopefully taking these practical tips and using them. But just looking at one of the questions here, do you have any advice on how to best let go of previous experiences that no longer serve you? And that's a fantastic question. And I actually did some work with someone recently within sport, and it was around previous experiences. And a lot of it's language. Language is so important. We're in Mental Health Awareness Week. When we talk about mental health, I think mental is a really poor word to use because there's so much negativity that's kind of attached to that word. And that's no different when we look at our previous experiences, our failures, the things that feel negative. No experience is good or bad. We just decide whether it's good or bad. I think that's really important. Things just happen. We then decide what to make of them. So we're in control on how we view that experience. And also, no matter how negative or difficult a situation was, there's something to learn from it. It helps you grow. And I think when we can start to change our mindset, our reframing of, do you know what? I might not have enjoyed that experience. It might have been really tough. It might have been seemed or deemed as a failure, but actually, what did I learn from that? How have I grown? How have I developed from that? And then accepting the fact that the only way I can change that experience, if it was in my idea a negative experience, the only way I can change that is in my actions and my behaviors in the now. That's the staying in your lane. The only thing I can control is the now. I can't control the future. I can influence it, but I can't control the future and I can't do anything about what's happened. But what I can do is execute in the moment, stay present, look at my actions and my behaviors, and then that's going to hopefully influence my future to be a really positive and successful one. So a little bit of a ramble there, but hopefully there's a few bits in there around reframing and language, but then also how to stay in the moment and the present and understanding that it's just our actions and behaviors that are going to create our future, and that whatever happened to us before is something I can't control about, so I can't put my concerns there. But it is also a tool and fuel to be able to move us forward if we choose to find the positives from it. So thank you very much for that question. There was one other around recording available. I've seen that one of my colleagues has responded to that. And yes, all the recordings are available. And before we sign off for this session, I just want to say, one, thank you for joining me, and hopefully that was a great experience for you and there's some learnings from that. But also, there are so many sessions happening this week on the platform. There always are, but even more so in terms of those live sessions. This is such an important week around mental health and movement. So please go onto the app, have a look in terms of our schedule, see what's available, talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends around some of the sessions you think might be useful. But if they can't join live, that's okay. We've got recorded sessions throughout. And then if they're struggling for time to, remember there are so many short sessions in there, like the 60-second breath work, that can really make a huge difference to us in such a short amount of time. We all have 1 minute, and that's 1 minute that can really help us manage not only our mental health and our overall well-being, but our performance as well. So thank you for joining me today, and I will hopefully see you soon.